2 years ago, I did not have any trouble hooking a black bream in the system that I frequent. It wasn't hard, as there appeared to be a stable and substantial black bream population in the lake. Now, there appears to be close to few, if any, black bream left. I can now spend weeks hunting and searching for them and not get a solitary glimpse or sense that they are even present anymore. How can an entire population collapse in a 2-year period? It seems to be a similar scenario to the South Australian snapper situation. That is, unsustainable, vandalistic over-extraction by wreck fishers and professional netters, leading to the decimation of a population, as its ability to restock itself diminishes rapidly. Black bream are very slow growing. That is common knowledge. Available data indicates that it takes approximately 7 years for a bream to reach the legal minimum length of 25 centimetres. Bearing in mind a female flathead can take 4 years to reach 57 centimetres, which is full sexual maturity, but 7 years for a bream to reach 25 centimetres is a damn long time. And a 32-34 centimetre bream can potentially be 20 years old, and at that size it is smaller than the 36 centimetre legal limit for a flathead that obviously grow very quickly compared to bream. With bream, if you take out the big old breeding stock, you are likely to be taking out 15 to 25-year-old fish. That's right, 15 to 25 years of age. It's taken them a decade and a half to 2 decades to get big. It's a long, slow process. Once gone, you have to wait another 20 years and not attack what is still there in order to allow the black bream to grow to that big stage again. So, as mentioned, 2 years ago, there was a stable, reasonably substantial black bream population for the geographic location of my lake. To go from not that hard to fish for them to the whole waterway as a black bream desert is devastating. One problem with sustainability is that it is a lake open to any FIFO professional netters. So they can drive down from the cities further up the coast, hit the lake, and then scamper off back to where they came from, watching the lake recede in their rear view mirrors. And of course, it's very easy to take out a black bream population. They have this weird breeding trait where they mass together into a big ball when they are breeding. You can see it on your boat sounder. So, just run a net through that big ball and bingo! Hey presto, the magical disappearance of the black bream. I've also visually witnessed a professional netter working in a sanctuary zone, which raises the question of why have sanctuary zones? The whingers and whiners carry on about being robbed of good fishing spots, which they, as Australians, have a democratic entitlement to access. Actually, very little of the country is accessible, as some rich git owns it. Seriously, how big is this continent? How hard is it to preserve a potential breeding zone by moving to another spot to fish? This right to fish anywhere can palpably become a basic right to decimate any fish species. And the opposite of decimation is preserving and replenishing. Thus, sanctuary zones become important as spaces to preserve the breeding cycle of fish species and thus replenish fish species, especially in estuarine systems, which are very limited, unlike the open ocean. Those sanctuary zones can be little conveyor belts, restocking a system as it is being decimated in the free-for-all space outside of the zones. Yet, the current Conservative government does not seem to believe in sanctuary zones. Quite the opposite. It often appears happy to give an approving nod to the catchphrase that those sanctuary zones represent the hideous deprivation of the average fishing pros and holiday fishers, inviolate right to be thorough in the castration and emasculation of a fish population like the black brim. It's the way we do things, and it's the way they have always been done, was the response one query received by the government in relation to the overfishing and the decimation of the fish population of a local lagoon. So, a one-size-fits-all approach for environmental exploitation. With such displays of disinterest in preservation spaces, obviously without policing or some form of compliance, then sanctuary zones aren't sacrosanct, and typical average Australians will net or fish them, as I'm not doing any harm. But in the black brim's case, due to their slow growth rate and the fact that a big brim takes 20 years to get big, there needs to be an exploration of ideas, such as a mandatory slot limit, as well as making it seriously illegal to harm or remove those big breeders from the system. I'll talk about slot limits towards the end. So, that's the black brim in my local system. What about the flathead? Well, the singularly most repeated phrase in relation to my local lake, the lake has no big flathead. If you seriously want to catch big flathead, go to one of the other waterways. Seriously? This obviously begs the question, what is happening to all the big females over 58 centimetres? Are they all committing platycephalus suicide? Or are the flathead being over-extracted by net and line, such that the females aren't reaching full sexual maturity, and thus replenishing the lake? To understand the flathead breeding cycle, one huge myth needs to be put to the sword. Male flathead do not, at a certain length, change sexes to become female flathead. They're like those species where one sex grows much bigger than the other. Recent research has shown that males on average grow slowly to around 58 or 60 centimetres, and that is their lifespan. Females grow faster than males and keep growing past 58 centimetres to 60 centimetres, and can get up past the metre mark in length and potentially 1.2 metres. So if you catch a fish over 60 centimetres, it is a female. But the big revelation in recent research is the difference in sexual maturity between male and female flathead. On average, female flathead don't reach full sexual maturity until they reach the 57 centimetre mark. Males, on the other hand, on average, reach sexual maturity at 31 centimetres. So the current legal limit of 36 centimetres for the smallest flathead you can take means that less than 5% of the females, but approximately 75% of the males, could be described as sexually mature when spawning time rolls around. That's at the lower end of the legal limit scale. At current minimum catch size of 36 centimetres, you would be taking a horny male or a chaste and sexually indifferent female. A small proportion of females less than 57 centimetres can be sexually active, but are likely to have smaller amounts of roe and produce smaller numbers of young. But the majority of female flathead are not fully sexually productive and restocking the population until they get past 57 centimetres. That is, they get big. So the larger the female, the greater the reproductive potential, and thus the greater the population restocking potential. So the small class sizes of flathead you are catching are potentially dominated by males, and the larger class sizes are females. Whereas in my local waterway, wreck fishermen can potentially take one female over 70 centimetres and 10 per day big females in the 57 to 70 centimetre range. For professional netters, there is no size limit, so they can take as many big females or small males as they can get into their nets. In terms of the holiday wreck fisherman who is fishing when the big females are sexually active from November to March, they could be taking 10 females a day over 57 centimetres. But would that be a problem? Well, taking 57 to 70 centimetre flathead is taking all the big girls. who make sure there is a healthy population in terms of numbers within the lake. Over-extraction of all the big females, which, bear in mind, they also prey on smaller flathead, could end up with an explosion of small flathead, predominantly all males, who produce no young. It's noticeable that when you fish for flathead, you find that around one of those big female flathead, you may have 20 or 30 small randy males hanging about. So, hypothetically, if you have 31 fish, one big female and 30 males, you take out the big female by net or line, and mathematically you still have a healthy population of 30 fish in the system who can't reproduce. So those 30 will keep growing and getting bigger, and fishermen will catch them as they get bigger, and they will say, all is good in the lake, until all the males die and the lake's flathead population collapses overnight. And in my lake, the majority of the flathead being caught appear to be row-free small males. In a system that conventional local wisdom has clearly stated, if you want to catch a big flathead, go to another system. You're bright enough to follow the logic. Lots of little males and a dearth of big females. Warning, population collapse looming up into the headlights like a wallaby at dusk, and you know the outcome. What about Victoria to the south? Have they thought about this issue and addressed it? Well, partially. In Victoria, with a maximum legal limit of 55 centimetres, and no fish over that length being taken, and males growing to 58 centimetres, then the big females over 60 centimetres are not being touched, in theory. The big females are protected from wreck fishing extraction. However, with a lower legal limit of 30 centimetres, you are actually throwing back the sexually immature males and keeping all the sexually mature males. At least in New South Wales, with a 36 centimetre limit, some of the fertile males are being thrown back. So, what is truly needed? Well, management, which the Victorian system suggests involves a few key actions. Firstly, monitoring of populations in a system. Secondly, oversight of the populations. Thirdly, compliance to prevent over-extraction and the potential collapse of a population in a system. Instead, we have the DPI. Which has the word industry in its title, and its ambit is to look at how industry relates to our lands and waterways. And the three big stakeholders which it seems to focus on, that is, focus on their opinions, needs, whims and desires, are the farmers, the shooters, and the professional fishers. And are they three groups who have a vested interest in the exploitation of the natural environment for profit or fun? Are we looking at stakeholder management rather than the science and data-based stewardship of the complex and genuinely fragile ecosystems that our waterways embody? The authorities' response on the health of our waterways up to this point appears to be that they are doing a fabulous job and everything is just butterflies and roses and always looking up. But there is not a solitary shred of evidence or data that this is the case in relation to the waterway that I frequent. There is solid, anecdotal and circumstantial evidence of the reverse. The black bream are vanishing. There is a plethora of small male flathead, and the big girls appear to be on the way out. What is thriving is the tiny bait species, which pass your sounder in great masses. But no, truly big flathead or bream are beneath those schools feeding on them, as would be the case in a healthy system in terms of the populations of those species. Victoria appears to have empowered an independent statutory body that seems to base its decisions on research and data. As a state, they appear to be making some headway in preserving and revitalising their aquatic systems, or ecosystems, while I watch my region slowly dying as populations of big fish dwindle and decline, with a brand new boat ramp to allow you access to a deteriorating and collapsing system. Honestly, I would prefer a rich and abundant system to a new boat ramp giving ease of access to an expanding aquatic desert. So, perhaps a slot limit for flathead of 36 to 57 centimetres. In that way, sexually mature males under 36 centimetres are returned, and the sexually mature females over 57 centimetres are returned. You're taking some sexually mature males, not all, and the sexually immature females that aren't breeders. A bag limit of 4 per day per person. 4 flathead in that size range will feed a family for that day. Bream are different. As mentioned, they are very slow growing, and the 2 main species are Acanthopagris butcheri, the black bream, and Acanthopagris australis, the yellowfin bream. For black bream, a bag limit of 3 per day, and for yellowfin, limit of 4 per day. Why the difference? This goes to a past experience of my own, which gave me the idea of a bag limit of 3 for black bream, because they have to get up their population numbers purely through the breeding cycle within the waterway. They don't leave it to breed. Yellowfin bream can leave the waterway, and often do. So there is a second means of yellowfin bream replenishment from migrations into the lake, not available to black bream, who are reliant purely on their breeding cycle, as they don't leave their lake or estuarine home. One final comment. My opinions should not be adopted unless put to the test with solid data and research to prove or disprove the efficacy and benefits, or otherwise, of such an approach. Decisions should not be based on the dopey conventional wisdom of 4-schooner pub philosophers. Also, if viable fingerlings of black bream can be produced for restocking purposes, then, just like bass, this is a pathway that should be considered, but only if it is viable.